Agile is ideally suited to complex risks.
Welcome to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where Peter Madison and David Sharrock discuss
so maybe
the
if we go
complexities of
into the if
adopting
it's
new
done
ways
well,
of working at scale.
Hello, it's good to be back. And here's my good friend Dave, and we've got a guest today. Ivan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So my name is Ivan Gekht. I'm the CEO at Gehtsoft. We are a software delivery partner for high-stake environments, working inside existing systems, constraints, and basically making change predictable, explainable, and safe.
Ivan, as you're describing it, and it's the second time I've heard you describing it, I love the way you describe high-stakes environment, because I never describe the work we do as working in high-stakes environment. I will from now on. I think it's a really great way of calling attention to those changes that have to happen, and they have to happen without anybody really being impacted by it, right? There is obviously lots of software, lots of systems that are becoming obsolete and need to be replaced, and so on. And the thing that goes into my mind immediately is I've been in so many conversations where the immediate reaction is, therefore, we cannot use agile methods. We need to project manage this. And I'd love to get your insight. I have a view on this one, but I'd love to get your insight. When that happens, what's your response? What are you thinking? What do you say?
I usually ask why, right? So why do you think that? Because it's interesting. Agile to a point created agile community. Maybe I don't want to play the blame game, but agile has a little bit of a controversial meaning behind it by now, right? But in its essence, agile delivery is about being more predictable, being more consistent, and reducing risks in transformations like that. So well done agile would work actually better in a complex environment than any project management predictive methodology, just because of its essence, right? So that's why agile exists.
Yeah, reducing the size of the change allows you to reduce the amount of risk, which is, I mean, that's typically how we end up in those conversations. It's like, so you say you don't want to do agile, but what you want to do is way riskier. And
that's true.
But it's recognized, and it has some. To Ivan, you were just saying, there's a lot of experiences of something that is in name agile, but actually is less predictable, ignores risk, or is a little, sort of cavalier with how they're dealing with risk. And I think, to your point, it's so true. Agile is ideally suited to complex risky environments if it's done well. So maybe if we go into the if it's done well, what do you look for? What do you expect? Are you providing the delivery teams, or do you work with existing delivery teams and help them apply agile practices? How do you look at it?
We, as a business, we do both. We do consulting and coaching and training, and we actually do full cycle software development and managed service as well. So when we look at agile, we look at it as what it is. It's a framework or certain approach to software development, or actually to any kind of implementation that has certain pillars built into it. And you use it when you work in a complex environment. If you're doing a simple project, if you're doing a complicated project, you don't use agile. If you're working in a chaos, you don't use agile, right? So it's a tool that has its application. And when we look at it, what I see a lot is that it turned from a system that guarantees delivery in a complex environment into anarchy of sorts, right? So it's a freedom to a point of anarchy, and it's not. And agile never was supposed to be that. So yeah, when we look, for example, in consulting, right, the very first thing I would look at would be retrospectives. Not planning, not delivery. Yeah. It would be retrospectives to see how the feedback is handled within the team. How do they give feedback? How do they take feedback? And how do they work with the process? So yeah. I hope that answers your question.
I love where you're going on that one, because are they learning, right? Is the agile fundamentally is a learning practice, and so you're stronger If they're able to receive feedback, give feedback, they have the conversations that are necessary, not the comfortable conversations. And there's a lot of things that you can see through a retrospective. I think that's just such an insightful point there.
I think going to the point of is helping that executive understand like why is this important? Why do we need to learn? Because when we're right at the beginning, we don't necessarily know how to solve the problem. So we've got to learn how to do the problem. And to do that, we really need to try a few things and see what works and see if we can learn a few things about how this might be. Are we going in the right direction? Do we need to course correct?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to learning, there is a big misconception that a lot of teams are missing, especially when Agile started to be implemented in large organizations with a lot of financial backing. Because if you strip away everything, let's take a singular Agile team in a vacuum, a startup, and let's say you have $10,000 of salaries to pay out at the end of the sprint for the team, right? So you need to make $10,000 within this next sprint to make sure that everybody gets paid. And right now you are making 8. So the next sprint conversation, the next sprint planning is about two things, like how do we make it 10,000 instead of 8 so we can all get paid and not lose 20% of the salary. And now you can add the learning conversation, right? So do we want to spend an entire sprint learning, not make the money? But hopefully it will help us make 12,000 next sprint and we can pay us back that extra 2K, right? And then have a very good life moving forward because now it's a 12,000 instead of 10 that we needed. But it's a conscious decision of the team to actually risk their money, risk the salaries that they're getting to learn something that would make them work better in the next step. So now if you remove that part of a feedback mechanism, right? The direct tight coupling between the money they are getting and the work they are putting in, suddenly you have all of these conversations like, hey, we need to waste the sprint learning something because it will maybe help us do a better job next time around. Is that an outcome? Learning is not an outcome in my mind. It's an output at best. It should lead to an outcome that you should be able to show in the future. So when we talk about Agile as like Agile is about learning, yes, it is, but with a lot of constraints around it.
Yeah. And it's as you're describing that, Ivan, I love the context that you're describing just about, there has to be a real outcome at the end. That monetary, I mean, money is an easy thing to count generally in most organizations. It's not always purely money. There are lots of different outcomes that you can be chasing. But the conversation isn't about, hey, I learned this, or I've delivered this, or I've worked on this for X hours. It's about, did we get these outcomes coming out? That's that sort of piece that comes in, or something that is very easily forgotten as you start scaling across many teams, because there's always another team that we would have had the outcome, except it was Peter's team was supposed to do that final piece, which raises a whole bunch of other things that we can come to. Can you talk a tad about what are the organizations that you look at where you go, yeah, we can't help you? What are the things that are the red flags that tell you this is an organization that has high stakes as this is, we're not in the right place to come in and help?
It's an interesting question. I wouldn't say that any organization is beyond help. But I think that organizations that are the most challenging to work with are the organizations where no one cares. And that's just as simple as that, right? So if you don't have people who care enough to make the change, it's very hard to push the change through because status quo is the biggest enemy in the majority of the situations.
I was not expecting you to say that, I have to say. Peter, what were you going to say?
It's hard to change people if they're comfortable with what they're doing, and if there's no incentive for them to change, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier. Is these are incentives. This is what tell us how they're doing things. So sometimes they need a stronger incentive, or you need to look at are they the right people in the right roles, and that conversation can be an interesting one to have.
Agile transformations, from what we've seen in a lot of organizations, I was looking at the statistics like 5, 6 years ago, so it might not be as relevant now, but then it was that about 50 to 60% of the people would change during the Agile transformation.
I don't remember the numbers as high as that. The sort of rule of thumb in many transformation conversations when I was working with a lot of these sort of enterprise coaches was you typically expect a turnover around 20%. Doesn't surprise me the 50 to 60%,
That
especially as
was
you move into larger organizations with a much more staid, less entrepreneurial sort of mindset or less innovative, that would increase for sure. And I'm still just thinking about the nobody cares comment, because I was actually thinking we'd be talking about leaders that don't want to let go of decisions, or that there are lots of different things that make it awkward. But then again, all of us are in that space of we'll find a solution. But that comment about people not really caring, and that expresses itself in so many different ways. It's a sort of passive resistance. Everybody nods their head. Definitely will do whatever it is, the commitment that they make during a sprint planning session, some sort of a planning session, which never gets followed through on, and there are no consequences of missing your commitment, and things like this. So there's a lot of differences that can come out of it. I thought that was a really interesting
Yeah, I
to
would
look at.
like personally, I would much rather have a team who are proactively fighting
Yeah.
me on the transformation, and but talking to me and making sure that they can try and understand what I'm saying and give their arguments,
Yeah.
and maybe we can talk about it, help them find a way, because it shows that they care, over a team that's just quietly sitting down and not saying anything, right? And then going and not doing anything as well.
Okay, it can be useful sometimes to look at like why that is, because it quite often is cultural. It's the way, not always, but sometimes it's simply that that's the way that they've been treated. They've tried fighting, and they've fought and they fought and they fought, and they've been told no, 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 and they're now just yeah, whatever. Oh yeah, it's just yet another person coming up with yet another way of doing this, and nobody's going to listen. It's not going to change anything. It's just going to be the same thing. So why should I? And that can happen. Not
Can
that
I
that's
can I explore,
happy to
Ivan?
talk.
Well, you said at the beginning about the high stakes environment,
Sure.
about predictability, and I think this is something. And again, we've worked with great agile teams, and they're all about predictability. You get lots of predictability from it, and yet many organizations I work with, the thing that they struggle with the most is long-term predictability over short-term planning, right? So how does that? What do you see? What are the things that maybe looking at from a leadership perspective? Because they get very, very, they want to know dates. They want to have commitments that are, strongly 100% this is going to happen by this time. But we know that in a complex environment, there's a lot that you can move, but it's very possible that without just having lots of buffer in case something goes wrong, you don't necessarily have the commitment, the predictability in the sort of accuracy levels that leadership might be expecting. What
Look,
sort of
yeah.
conversations do you see? How do you kind of make that palatable?
So when it comes to predictability, what always surprises me is that agile as an approach, or this whole reversed iron triangle mechanism. If we look at it, right, it's all about making sure that you hit the date and the budget. You can be very flexible on the scope, yes, because you need to trade off on something. But for some reason, people forget about that, and once they start working in the real environment, everybody is now trading on the budgets and on the timelines. It literally goes against the great principles that are built into a lot of agile frameworks, right? So it's about constraints that exist. It's the budget and the time. So one of the metaphors that we use very often is you have a 6 p.m. dinner tonight, right? And you need to cook something. And you know that you have the family members coming in, so you can't really go out and say like, hey guys, you know what? It was a very complex situation, so the dinner is gonna happen next week. So you all are gonna go home hungry tonight. Like, it's not an option, right? You have all the people coming in. You don't want to look stupid. So, but do you have to really follow through on a 6-course menu that you had in mind, or maybe you drop a couple of things to make that 6 p.m. commitment and make the budget that you have in mind, even if you lost your wallet on the way back and lost half of the cash that you had on you, right? So you can still manage. This is dealing with the complexity in agile way. It's achieving the goal, but maybe with a little bit different of a scope, but still making sure everyone is fed, not hungry, and it happened exactly at 6 p.m. as you promised. In some organizations, yes, it can be challenging to have some of these conversations because they really want to see the scope done exactly. But if you really want to have the scope done exactly, don't use Agile. Because if you have a well-defined scope that you need to implement, it's not complexity, right? It's complicated at best. Go out, use PMBOK, and do a great project. Add the buffers, add the risk management, like do all of that, and you'll be happy, and everyone will be happy.
Unless you've made your 6-course meal very, very complex and you've never made any of them before, and no matter what buffers you put in, you've created so much risk in it that you're still not going to end up serving dinner until 10 o'clock at night.
In that particular case, yeah. That's why Agile.
Yes, which is following through on the analogy there, that some of those courses may have to be like tuned down a little in terms of. I do like that analogy. I think that's a good way of explaining it, and it is one of those pieces. If you do have a particular scope that has to be delivered, you can still use Agile. It's just when are those bits going to be delivered? The problem comes when you set the scope and you set the date, because now that's just wishful thinking. Especially if it's something you've never done before, the chances of getting that exact scope on that exact date, that's going to be very, very tricky. For anything that's of any sufficient complexity, that it's going to take some time to do. If you can reduce it down, though, I completely agree. Then yes, you can solve this in different ways. Imagination helps.
Now, how about what are you seeing? I love the analogy. I'm just thinking as I'm listening to Peter describing this, the analogy, summarizing it. It described my Christmas day perfectly because we had a plan of 6 different settings, and we didn't get to all 6. Let's put it that way. So there was some complexity that happened early in the afternoon. There's an element around things like innovation and learning, and we touched briefly on you can't be spending the whole time learning, but retrospectives are about how how a team is addressing the things that go wrong. But another aspect of learning is innovation. And especially you're working in a field where maybe you're moving away from legacy systems. There's a lot changing in the technology space, always a lot changing, but right now even more. So how does innovation roll into how you approach those problems? Where do you create space for innovation? How does that relate to the overall problems that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so innovation is a great topic. We can have a whole another podcast for I don't know, talking an hour just about the innovation. But what's interesting is that if you look hard, then you will find frameworks and approaches that makes innovation predictable. Too. One of my favorite personal favorites is theory of inventive problem solving. It's a pretty old methodology. It initially was developed in, I think, 60s, late 60s, early 70s in Soviet Union. But basically, Altshuler and his team of research scientists took about 15,000 patents that were filed with the Bureau, and they analyzed them to see if there are any commonalities in how people approach innovation. And they actually developed a whole set of laws, nature laws they call, and a whole set of approaches that you can take, you can apply to your situations, and you can make innovation way more predictable than just brainstorming or relying on a collective crowd minds to maybe come up with something during a sprint. So you put structure into the innovation, and then you can put innovation into a structured process to.
I was going to say, how do you go about making space in organizations for that? Because quite often, I mean, we're back to that. Hey, where should I be spending my time problem. It's the should I be spending it on the innovation piece, or I've just got to deliver the next feature, get the next feature out the door.
I personally don't like talking about features at all. It's very misleading conversation always, right? So I much rather prefer to talk about goals, because goals is something that organizations understand, that actually something that they measure. And a lot of executives or managers are actually being evaluated based on how effectively organization reaches the goals, not on how effectively organization is shipping new features, right? So when the team is trying to talk about features or finding space between delivering features and something to the management, it's a very comfortable space for the team because they talk about what they understand. But it's very uncomfortable space for the management. So if you reverse this conversation and you start to talk about the goals, and you start to talk about how to make goals be achieved more predictably, then suddenly you have way more open and way more engaged managers to include innovation into these conversations, because you're coming with a commitment and accountability to help them reach these goals, instead of coming in with like what is being heard as, hey, we want to have fun and we want to innovate and we want to do a hackathon, and people need that for moral support, and you do you when it comes to goals, we gonna do us when it comes to all of these events. So you shift the frame of the conversations, and suddenly the conversation really change.
Again, some great things to drill into there. Goals kind of come from some strategic direction, hopefully, and they cascade down. At some point, the goal's not going to tie directly to a feature. It's going to tie to some sort of behavior change that we want to get from a customer or some other thing that we're providing a system for, and so on. A goal on a sprint by sprint basis, or in that tiny, feature level, small kind of cog part of that goal, is very different to a broader goal over, say, a few months of trying to see subscriptions go up on a service or something like this. So what happens in that gap between we have a sort of a quarterly goal that's a business goal that we're trying to achieve versus the actual technical work that's being done? How do you cross that gap?
I actually very big believer of not creating the gap in the first place, because if the team or a number of teams are accountable for reaching a certain goal, that goal should be visible, that goal should be in front of their eyes every single sprint planning, it has to be in front of their eyes every single day they're doing the work. And then it shifts the conversation from implementing a feature to a certain point, a validated hypothesis innovation to track. Okay, so if we're gonna implement this and this and this changes, we should see subscriptions go up by 10%, right? They're not gonna go up overnight from 0 to extra 10%. It never happens, right? So probably you're gonna make one change and it's gonna affect 1%. And then you're going to make another change and it's going to affect another 2%. And then you're going to slowly build up to that 10 that you want to see. So keep tracking. And then it helps shift the conversation from feature implementation into the reaching the goal.
It's a good use of language, and I like it because it's it's a bit of a shift from the language we often end up speaking about in this space. So I think it ties in nicely. We often talk about goals, making sure the goals are measurable, how those then get cascaded into teams, how we align teams to those, what we see as a consequence of that. So I do like the way that you're framing that. I think it works very well. What other questions might we have, Dave?
I have so many questions. I'm trying to give some space. I've enjoyed this is a great way of kind of kicking off my year, because it's a reminder of, this is what great agile organizations look like. They don't focus on, outcomes and how many features you're going to deliver in the next month and things like this. They focus on, are we achieving our goals? How do we work together to get there? Are we developing the skills and the tools and so on we need to be able to move forward? So there's a lot that we're coming out of that. Maybe the question I'd like to explore, or the space I'd like to explore more, is around innovation. And you said, you've hinted at it, you mentioned the theory of innovative problem solving, but innovation, like we're in a space right now, organizations are in a space where innovation is their lifeblood. They have to be innovating continuously. It's something that so many, and Peter and I are kind of probably in that space where there's a lot of organizations go, I need all of these features as fast as you can. And by the way, you can't miss any deadlines and so on. And we have to innovate and achieve these goals. And of course, you can't do all of those things together. It's a recipe that is guaranteed not to be very tasty, to go back to the meal that we were talking about. But in a space where vibe coding is, endemic, and there are people who have no technical background are going to start coming in and going, but I built this just using large language models, and we've got this, that, and the other. How do teams innovate? How do teams really kind of balance getting business outcomes while at the same time somehow staying close to or on top of the many, many changes happening in the space? What do you look for? What do you encourage to kind of enable that?
So actually, it's a very interesting question. Thank you for that. Innovation comes in many shapes and forms. So what I really dislike in the whole innovation conversation is that innovation usually being put aside as a monstrous animal that you need to fight or you need to conquer and have an entire separate journey for the innovation. While in reality, innovation is in everyday work. Like you spend 10 minutes a day, you can always find 10 minutes a day, right? Always. It's as simple as that. You spend learning something new, and then you immediately apply it in this small safe space, like a sandbox environment. And if it works, you immediately apply it into the actual product, right? And then it doesn't make a humongous change. It's not an innovation to the scale of inventing a wheel, obviously. But this small change is suddenly, in a matter of year, transforming your team, transforming your product, and they transforming the entire organization in a lot of cases. And then everybody looks back, and nobody can pinpoint a singular point in time where that transformation happened. It just happened over time. So I love our CTO always like there are no boring projects. There are never boring features to develop. There is never something boring unless you are boring, unless your approach is boring. Like I can make interest in any kind of project you give me because I can always find a way to build in something new, to try new approaches, to evaluate new technologies within that project that I can scale then into a multitude of other work. And when you have this mindset approach in the innovative work, suddenly there is much more space for it to happen than you think.
Yep, I think that's a very good way of framing it. We often one of the things I hate is when we see that innovation is a separate department. I think we did an episode on that ages ago. It's like the innovation department. No innovation happens anywhere else. It's like just like I think we're at the point where we're just about ready to be able to wrap this up for the session. It's been a fascinating conversation. We've covered a lot of different areas. So at this point, we normally like to ask everybody to provide like what's the main takeaway they would like our audience to take with them. Ivan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I actually wrote it down for myself, and you mentioned it multiple times about the language and framing, and I think that I tend to forget how important finding the right language and the right words and the right ways to present things can really affect the change. So yeah, thank you for that.
Most welcome, Dave.
Yeah, as you can probably tell from the questions that I've had coming in, it's been a really interesting conversation. I really appreciate it just for that sort of revisit of just how powerful that agile mindset can be and the agile approach can be for the right context. And sometimes we get worn down a little bit by situations where it's difficult to get that moving. Having said that, the bit that I've written down is the theory of innovative problem solving, because I want to drill into that a little bit more. As Peter was saying, innovation, and as you were describing, but innovation is not the big thing that happens over in the cool kids area. It's the thing that happens every day at your desk. And I'll be looking into that to look at some of those laws that were coming out about how to build innovation into the problem solving that we're doing. So I'll definitely be following up on that.
I like it. I'm going to be looking
Yeah,
at that
thanks for
one
that.
too.
Inventive, theory of inventive problem solving. So there's a link looking for tips, theory of inventive problem solving.
That's definitely one. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes too. I'll add it to my list of, hey, I got to go read up on that a little bit. Amusingly enough, I've got to give an executive presentation next week to a bunch of executives. And the big topic of the conversation is exactly that, is that the sales team wants predictability and they want people locked into dates. And the rest of the organization is like, well, we're not going to be able to do this the way that you're doing it. If you're fixing scope and fixing time, then the delivery isn't going to happen. So I thought it was very, your framing was good for that. And I think I might borrow your dinner plans because I think that'll work nicely for this particular audience. And I'll add it to some of the other examples I have prepared. So thank you both for a fascinating and engaging conversation. And I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter.
Ivan, thanks again. Thanks, Peter.
You've been listening to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where your hosts, Peter Madison and David Sharrock, focus on the art and science of digital, agile, and DevOps at scale.